Okay, so let's get started. Again, I want to welcome everybody today. Thank you for taking the time to log on. We are asking for attendance purposes that everybody use the chat box at the bottom of their screen to sign in with their name and their organization. My name is Samantha Barnaby. I am the Senior Planning Associate on the planning team at CARES of NY. Today, I will provide a brief overview of the fiscal year 21 Continuum of Care Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO, New Project Opportunities. This webinar training was developed specifically for COC membership, board members, and community stakeholders who may be interested in applying for available new COC funds this year. Couple housekeeping items. Before we begin, I ask that attendees keep themselves muted through the presentation as we have allotted time for Q&A at the end. As we are going through the presentation, please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. Please be sure you have selected to send the question to everyone and not specific individuals when doing so. CARES staff will be discussing all submitted questions during the Q&A following the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the CARES website under the NOFO page in the coming days. An FAQ document on new project opportunities will also be posted to our website. CARES developed this webinar because we believe it is our responsibility as collaborative applicant to provide clear and concise information on the COC NOFO to the full community to ensure the COC process is community-centered and transparent. Next slide, please. Today's presentation provides a summary of new project opportunities available in the fiscal year 21 COC NOFO. Specifically, the presentation will briefly review what a continuum of care is and the COC application. We will summarize COC bonus and reallocated funding opportunities and summarize DV bonus opportunities. For each new funding opportunities, we will review who is eligible to apply, what project types are eligible, and how HUD will score new project applications. We will also review expansion grants, steps for submission and deadlines, and answer any questions during the Q&A portion. Next slide, please. So let's get started. What is a continuum of care? Before detailing what can be applied for this year, it is important to have a clear understanding of the continuum of care program and its goals. The Continuum of Care, or COC program, is a funding stream out of HUD designed to promote a community-wide commitment to the goal of ending homelessness. The program provides funding to nonprofits, states, and local governments, and new this year to tribes and tribally designated housing entities to quickly rehouse homeless households while minimizing trauma and dislocation caused by homelessness. To that end, the COC program mostly funds housing assistance and support services for the most vulnerable persons experiencing homelessness, with the goal of providing housing and services for those persons who would struggle to remain successfully housed without ongoing case management. On the local level, the COC is the body of stakeholders who work collaboratively to implement the COC program and effectively and efficiently solve homelessness. It is this group of stakeholders, the COC, who submit the COC application on an annual basis. Next slide, please. The COC consolidated application is all within HUD's electronic system, eSNAPS. The collaborative applicant is responsible for submitting the application. The COC application is one part of the consolidated application. It contains information about the COC planning body, governance, overall performance, and the strategic planning process. HUD scores the COC application to determine the order of funding by COCs nationwide. The priority listing is the second piece of the consolidated application and contains project applications completed by grantees and then placed in rank order using the local COC rank and review process. It is within the priority listing that new and DV bonus applications will be submitted. Next slide, please. COC program project applications fall into two general categories: renewal applications and new project applications. As their names suggest, renewal applications are submitted annually by agencies currently receiving COC funding to support existing projects, most of which provide housing to persons who have experienced homelessness. New project applications purpose to use COC bonus reallocation or DV bonus funding to provide additional units, services, etc. Next slide, please. New project applications are funded through COC bonus reallocation and DV bonus funding. New project applications may be submitted as a new project, an expansion grant, or a transition grant. I will go into more detail about these funding sources and project forms as we continue the presentation. Next slide, please. For COC bonus projects, HUD allows COCs to apply for up to 5% of the COC's final pro rata need, which is a calculation of the total amount of funds the COC receives. Reallocation funding becomes available when a COC opts to shift funds from an existing eligible renewal project to create one or more new projects. And DV bonus projects. HUD has appropriated $102 million for DV bonus projects this year. Each COC has been provided a designated amount. We will go over your COC amounts in a few moments. Next slide. Reallocation is the process COCs use to shift funds, in whole or in part, from existing eligible renewal projects to create one or more new projects without decreasing the COC's ARD or annual renewal demand. Reallocation may be considered if a project is underperforming or regularly returning money to HUD that could otherwise be utilized in the community by another project, or a project just may no longer be meeting a current community need. If reallocation funds become available for the membership, CARES will reach out via email. Next slide, please. New and DV projects are submitted in a two-part process. First, applicants must fill out and submit the new or DV project application and submit them for scoring. Each COC has a review team that was selected to score applications. Scoring results will determine which projects will be submitted within the COC consolidated application. This is called the rank and review process and is HUD mandated as a part of the COC application. The intention of this process is to prioritize projects for funding based on the most significant local need and performance capabilities. The second part, applicants will need to submit their projects into the HUD system known as eSNAPS. We will review next steps for each of these applications at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. This slide shows the new funding that is available in each COC for COC bonus and DV bonus projects this year. These are also available per your respective COCs on the NOFO page of the CARES website under COC public posting. Next slide, please. Any nonprofit organization, state, Indian tribe, or tribally designated housing entity or local government are eligible to apply for COC bonus, reallocation, and DV funding. Applicants do not need to currently receive COC funding in order to be eligible. Project applications must meet the eligibility threshold requirements outlined in the fiscal year 21 COC program NOFO. We will discuss this more later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So COC bonus and reallocated funding. Next slide. Please note that the next few slides are specifically to COC bonus or reallocation funds. We will review DV project eligibility separately. Projects that are eligible this year for COC bonus or reallocated funding are permanent supportive housing that is either dedicated plus or has 100% beds dedicated to persons experiencing chronic homelessness. Permanent supportive housing is permanent housing with indefinite leasing or rental assistance paired with support services to assist homeless persons with a disability or family with an adult or child member with a disability achieve housing stability. All dedicated plus projects have to serve at least in part households with children. A dedicated plus project targets serving people who are slightly less vulnerable than those defined as chronically homeless. For more specific definition, please refer to the NOFO. As a reminder, if your COC can show that there are currently no chronic homeless persons in the community, as shown through the coordinated entry list, beds dedicated to those who are chronically homeless can be opened up to other homeless populations. Second, rapid rehousing projects serving persons who qualify as homeless under paragraphs 1, 2, or 4 of the interim rule 24 CFR 578.3. Rapid rehousing connects persons experiencing homelessness to permanent housing in the community through rental assistance and a tailored package of support services. Rapid rehousing emphasizes housing search and reallocation services in short and medium-term rental assistance to move homeless persons and families with or without disability as rapidly as possible into permanent housing. For category 1, these are folks who are unsheltered, so residing in a location not meant for human habitation, like under a bridge or in a car. Or sheltered, which can include emergency shelters or hotels paid for by DSS, as well as those exiting an institution where they resided for less than 90 days and were homeless upon entry. Category 2 includes those at imminent risk of losing their residence, so within 14 days. And category 4 covers those fleeing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, etc. Third, joint transitional housing, rapid rehousing projects, serving persons who qualify as homeless under paragraphs 1, 2, or 4 of the interim rule. Joint component projects combine transitional housing and rapid rehousing into a single project. The goal of a joint transitional housing rapid rehousing project is to provide a safe place for people to stay The transitional housing component, while providing financial assistance and wraparound support services to help people move into the state and stabilize in permanent housing, the rapid rehousing portion. Fourth, HMIS. This funds the data management system required by HUD to collect the characteristics and service needs of people experiencing homelessness, as well as associated staffing. And 5, support services only, coordinated entry project. Only the coordinated entry project can be applied for only one coordinated entry project can be applied for per COC. This funds coordination of the coordinated entry system, a required part of COC infrastructure that establishes a community-wide referral or priority list of households for COC funded housing, prioritizing the most vulnerable. As a note, any youth serving provider may serve unaccompanied youth age 24 and under, or families headed by youth age 24 and under who have an unsafe primary nighttime residence and no safe alternatives to that residence. Next slide, please. All new projects are required to enter into the HMIS system. DV projects must enter into a system that is comparable to HMIS. All new projects must participate in the COC's coordinated entry system. New projects must follow a Housing First model. Housing First prioritizes rapid placement and stability in permanent housing without service requirements or preconditions to admission. All new projects, applicants must match all requested grant funds, except for leasing funds, with no less than 25% of funds or in-kind contributions from other sources. HUD will allow new projects to request 1 year of funding with a longer initial grant term not to exceed 18 months to allow for the additional time required to start up a program. HUD strongly encourages all rental assistance to begin within 12 months of the award. Next slide, please. Project quality thresholds. All new projects must meet a specific quality threshold before HUD will consider the project for funding. Specifically, project applicants and subrecipients must demonstrate the financial and management capacity and experience to carry out the project and the capacity to administer federal funds. This includes satisfactory capacity drawdowns, performance for existing grants funded through the Shelter Plus Care or COC programs. Project applicants must demonstrate that they will be able to meet all timeline standards, which include things like approving activities and projects promptly, distributing funds to subrecipients within 45 days, and drawing down funds at least once a quarter. Next slide, please. New project application responses should demonstrate that the type of housing proposed fits the needs of the program participants. The type of supportive services offered ensures successful retention or rapid placement in permanent housing and are provided in a way that fits participants' needs. The proposed project has a specific plan to coordinate and integrate with other mainstream health, social services, and employment programs, and that participants are assisted in obtaining benefits for which they may be eligible. The proposed project provides enough rapid rehousing assistance to ensure participants may move from transitional to permanent housing. Coordinated coordinated entry and HMIS project quality thresholds can be found on page 47 and 48 of the NOFA application. Next slide, please. Apart from project quality, the NOFO does clearly outline the process by which HUD selects bonus projects for funding. We do know, however, how HUD determines funding for projects placed in Tier 2, and that all bonus projects are placed in Tier 2 in order to ensure an existing project that currently houses persons is not displaced by new projects. Tier 1 projects are scored on a 100-point scale. 50 points directly related to the COC application score. 40 points related to the project ranking. And 10 points is the community commitment to follow a housing first approach. Housing First is a model of housing assistance that prioritizes rapid placement and stabilization in permanent housing that does not have service participation requirements or preconditions, such as sobriety or minimum income thresholds. Transitional housing and support services only projects are considered using a Housing First model for the purpose of this NOFO if they operate with low barriers, work to quickly move people into permanent housing, do not require participation in supportive services, and for transitional housing projects, do not require preconditions for moving into transitional housing. Next slide, please. Now let's discuss DV bonus funding. Again, this year, HUD has established a pool of funds for DV bonus projects. These projects are intended to assist survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Projects that are eligible this year for DV bonus funding are rapid rehousing, projects that demonstrate trauma-informed, victim-centered approaches. There is a minimum of $50,000 for each project that is applied for. Second, joint transitional and permanent housing rapid rehousing component projects that demonstrate trauma-informed, victim-centered approaches. Again, there is a minimum of $50,000 that you have to apply for. And this, the second one combines 2 single projects into one. And then third, support services only project for coordinated entry to implement policies, procedures, and practices that equip the COC's coordinated entry to better meet the needs of survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. It's important to note that these must implement policies, procedures, and practices that equip the COC's coordinated entry to better meet the needs of people experiencing homelessness who are survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. Next slide, please. As seen earlier on slide 15, the project quality threshold for DV projects are the same as those for the COC projects. Next slide, please. HUD utilizes the following criteria to review DV housing projects that are placed in Tier 2. The COC score, up to 50 points in direct proportion to the score received on the COC application. Need for the project, up to 25 points based on the extent the COC is able to quantify a need for the project in its portfolio. Extent to the need and how the project will fill that gap. Quality of project applicant. Up to 25 points based on the previous performance of the applicant in surviving survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking. If a COC applies for the DV bonus, HUD will award a point value to each project application. Additionally, points will be a combination of the COC application score and the responses provided in the DV bonus specific questions in the COC consolidated application. Project scores will be based on a 100-point scale. Next slide, please. So funding criteria for DVCE programs. Up to 50 points in direct proportion to the score received on the COC application. And then up to 50 points based on the extent the COC is able to demonstrate the need for a coordinated entry system that better meets the needs of survivors of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, and how the project will fill this need. Next slide, please. We're now going to talk about expansion projects. Next slide, please. Expansion is the process by which a renewal project applicant submits a new project or DV bonus application to expand its current operations by adding units, beds, persons served, services provided to existing program participants or HMIS and or coordinated entry capacity. Expansion projects cannot replace other funding sources. Next slide, please. Expansion project applications may be submitted through bonus and or reallocation or DV bonus funding and are subject to the eligible activities we discussed. The bulleted list we are about to review are eligible projects through COC bonus funding. DV bonus eligible projects differ slightly. Permanent supportive housing that is dedicated plus or has 100% of beds dedicated to persons experiencing chronic homelessness. Rapid rehousing projects serving persons who qualify as homeless under paragraphs 1, 2, or 4 of the interim rule. Joint transitional housing and rapid rehousing projects serving persons who qualify as homeless under paragraphs 1, 2, or 4 of the interim rule. HMIS and support services only for coordinated entry. Next slide, please. Project applicants requesting expansion funds must submit 2 project applications. The renewal project application to be expanded and a new project application with just the expansion information. Next slide, please. So let's move on to submission process and deadlines. Next slide, please. In terms of process and timeline for submitting new project applications, new project applicants must be submitted both through your COC's local rank and review process and through eSNAPs. Check your local COC rank and review process to determine when new project applications are due to the Rank and Review Committee. The Rank and Review process instructions, applications, and scoring tools for new projects are listed under your respective COC on the CARES website. It is important to note that in many COCs, these applications are due within the next 10 days. The Rank and Review process is the process in which COCs are required to score all renewal, new, and DV project applications. Projects are then ranked from highest to lowest score, resulting in the application's ranking. COCs will use the ranking and funding allotted for new and DV bonus projects to determine which applications will be included in the overall application. All new project applications are ranked and will be listed on a separate COC priority listing from renewal project applications. All new project applications must be submitted in eSnaps on or before October 1st. The October 1st deadline will apply even if the rank and review process in your COC has not yet determined if your project will move forward. Next slide, please. On the rank and review section of the CARES website, you will find the written process and all the documents that were used for this year's application process. Within this section, you will also find the new and DV bonus applications and the submission due dates for your respective COCs. Next slide, please. The community portion of the COC application has the ability to receive 10 extra points through submitting a new project application that collaborate with other housing funding sources and other healthcare organizations. Specifically, 5 points will be provided to COC applications that submit at least one new project application that has an MOU with a healthcare organization to provide services to clients that will be housed through the project. Another 5 points will be provided to the COC applications that submit at least one new project application that utilizes funding sources other than COC or ESG to create additional beds and units in the project. Next slide, please. So what's next? If applying, please let CARES lead staff person for your community know what you will be applying for, such as what project type, target population, and estimated amount of funds to be requested. This will help us to ensure the rank and review process is as efficient as possible. You will need to complete new and/or DV bonus rank and review application, download the new project application detailed instructions for assistance with entering your project into the eSnaps, and then finally enter your project applications into eSnaps on or before the October 1st deadline. Next slide, please. CARES has created a webinar series. The NOFA details a variety of important topics. CARES has produced a series of webinars to cover specific topics in more detail. The additional webinars include presentations on the overall NOFA summary, new project opportunities, DV bonus opportunity, opportunities for renewing projects, consolidated and transition grants, an eSnaps refresher for renewal projects, and an eSnaps refresher for setting up a new project. Please be sure to view these webinars on the NOFO section of the CARES website. Please also be sure to visit the NOFO page on the CARES website often for important application information and due dates. Next slide, please. Please contact any members of the planning team with any questions you may have after we are part today. The list of available staff are on this slide here for all of you. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to now go into the Q&A. CARES staff will begin by restating questions and providing answers that were put in the chat during the presentation. Once those are complete, we will unmute everyone to see if there are any additional questions.
Okay, so thank you, Sam, and thank you again, everyone, for being on the call. So Maureen and I are going to go back and forth with a couple of questions that we received in the chat. And thank you for putting those in. Please feel free to put in more questions in the chat as we go along. But again, after we finish with those from the chat, we'll open it up to verbally ask any questions that you have. So one question that we received is if supportive housing funds can only be used for families. So it's a great question. To clarify, no, you can apply for a permanent supportive housing project that serves singles. However, you would need to do it in a specific way. So to reiterate, permanent supportive housing projects are eligible if they are either 100% dedicated to chronically homeless persons or dedicated plus, which is serving folks who are slightly less vulnerable than those who are chronically homeless. If your project decides to go the dedicated plus route, HUD mandates that you serve at least a portion of households that are households with children. If you decide to go the 100% dedicated chronic route, then you can serve 100% singles. So I hope that answers that question. Maureen, do you want to take our next one?
Sure. So we had a question about whether or not military sexual trauma was considered domestic violence. So yes, we think that military sexual trauma would be considered eligible under DV bonus funds. These funds are eligible for victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, and military sexual trauma would fall under that umbrella. So that would be eligible.
Great, thank you. So the next question, when you say that only one CE project may be applied for under COC bonus, does that preclude communities that have existing CE projects? Those communities that have existing CE projects and CE lead agencies can apply for additional funds. You would apply, so the agency that is the CE lead would apply for an expansion project using COC bonus or reallocation funds.
All right, the next question we had was, can individual agencies include HMIS funds in their application to cover the fee to CARES, who's the HMIS lead for many folks? So individual agencies cannot apply for an HMIS project if they're not the lead, but you can apply for HMIS funds through your new project application. There's a budget line item for HMIS, and this includes projects that will provide housing and services to victims of domestic violence to contribute data to a comparable database. So DV projects that aren't using HMIS can also apply for that funding on the HMIS BLI to contribute to those specific costs.
Great, thank you. So we received a question, if we wish to increase the number of units and beds, essentially the question is what is needed to be submitted. So if you are submitting an expansion project, what you will do is you will submit the renewal application with just the number of units and beds that you are looking to renew. And then you would submit a new project application in eSNAPS that includes the additional number of beds and units that you would like to add. So it's the two separate projects. In prior years, HUD had you submit a third application that combined all of them. They're not making us do that anymore, which is great. A little bit less legwork. They will do the combination of the amount of funds and the number of units and beds on their end if the project is selected to be awarded.
Yeah, so in a similar vein to that, the question about expansion projects. So yes, if you're submitting a request for an expansion on an existing project, you would complete the renewal project in eSNAPS, and then you would submit a new project application that covers what you're requesting as the expansion, and that would go through the new project rank and review process for your community. So I hope that answers that question.
One more thing, just Sam had mentioned the new project detailed instructions, and I wanted to just emphasize this, especially for those who have never filled out an application in eSNAPS before. HUD will name, a variety of questions that they would like answers to, but in a separate document in these detailed instructions, which we have linked on our website, they will detail more significantly the information that they want to see in that answer. And so it's going to be a stronger application if you make sure that you're answering all elements of that question as noted in the detailed instructions. And
Kelsey, can you speak to the second part of that expansion question?
So that expansion, the new project application is not the cumulative number of units. It's just the number that you're looking to add on. Yeah. So an answer about dates. So if you go to the CARES website and down on the rank and review section and select your community, you will see all of the due dates for rank and review. So I'm not sure if I can share my screen. Let me see. Well, I will put that in the chat here, specifically because the question is about New York 511. I'll put in the chat the link to that section. Are there other questions? So in terms of if you're doing an expansion project, if there is a portion in the renewal application that talks about, there's one page that talks about consolidations and expansions. If you're doing an expansion project, you would select yes there, and you're going to reference the number of units and beds that you will be applying for in the expansion. But the rest of that application, all of the narrative, the budget, where you list out the number of beds and units that you're applying for, you'll only be referring to your renewal application throughout the rest of the application. Similarly, in the expansion grant, so when you apply for that new project, you're going to note that it's an expansion grant. You're going to refer to the grant number that you're expanding upon, so the grant number of the renewal project. But for the remainder of the application in the budget, in the section that where you put the number of beds and units, you put just the number that you're looking to increase, so not the cumulative number. Okay, so another good question. The renewal projects are due 9/10 tomorrow in eSNAPS. And new project applications are not due until October 1st in eSNAPS. If you need to go back into a project because let's say you applied for an expansion project through rank and review and your project was not selected, if you need to go back into that renewal project to deselect that, yes, we're applying for an expansion, we can certainly open that project back up for you. The way that it works in eSNAPS is that when a project applicant submits their application, they're not actually submitting it to HUD, they're submitting it to the collaborative applicant, which for many of you is CARES. So we have the opportunity to see it and review it, and we can send it back to you if anything needs to be edited. It's a great question. The recording and this we will be able to send out the PDF of this presentation today. We hope to have the recording up on the website by end of day tomorrow. That's our goal. Other questions? We'll give it just a couple minutes to see if there are any others. And feel free at this point too, if you would like to unmute yourself to vocalize a question instead of using the chat, please feel free. So we will send out, I think we can send out via email all of the content, the recording, the slides. But then in addition, it will be up on the website as well as a reference. Anyone else have a burning question? Like Sam mentioned, we're also happy to work one-on-one, particularly when it comes to new projects and considering what you're interested in applying for, what makes sense to apply for, and especially for new folks who haven't been through this process before, you know, understanding that it's a two-step process, needing to apply both through rank and review and through eSNAPS. We're happy to walk through anything one-on-one. So a good question about eSNAPS. So the question is if who within an agency is able to create a username on eSNAPS. So if you need to create a username, you will go to the eSNAPS homepage and the person creating it will set up their username and their email. Once that is set up, anybody within the agency who is linked to that agency's eSNAP account will be able to go into their agency's eSNAP portal and link that new person to their agency. Please feel free to give us a call. We could do a screen share and walk you through that if it's necessary. And in terms of assistance with the new project, feel free to call your community lead. So Rhonda, that would be Kathy. But truthfully, you know, you can call any one of us. We'll either be able to support you one-on-one or redirect you if it makes more sense. Best protocol for contacting CARE staff. If we have any questions, I would say contact your community lead person for your community. So in Albany, that's Maureen. In Rensselaer, that's Nick. And again, really any one of us, we will make sure that it gets to the right person if it's not originally coming to the right person. Any other questions from folks? Okay, so just to remind folks again, for a new project application, there is both a rank and review application, which is the local community process that determines whose applications will be included in the submission to HUD. And then there is the HUD submission, the HUD application through their eSNAPS portal. Both need to be completed. The rank and review application due dates differ by community, so we'll direct you to our website. eSNAPS, we ask that everybody get in their eSNAPS application by October 1st. That is because HUD has a hard deadline in terms of when all project applications need to be in eSNAPS. So that's regardless of when the rank and review project ends. Courtney, feel free to give me a call or an email. Putting my email in the chat now. Rhonda, rank and review due dates differ by community, but for Ulster, your new project application is due September 20th. For Dutchess, I believe it's to be determined still. Okay, well, thank you, everybody. We really appreciate you being on the line. And again, reach out with any additional questions, and have a great day.